Win big in 2024 with Team Sync from RotoBaller. Import your fantasy teams and sync your leagues. Get customized tools and tailored advice for your specific rosters and scoring settings, including live recommendations from the Live Draft Assistant, Free Agent Finder, and Lineup Optimizer. Sync an unlimited amount of NFL, MLB, NBA, and NHL fantasy teams from all of the major fantasy platforms. Get a discount for any premium pass using my promo code Knuckler. Just visit rotoballer.com/radio and start rotoballing like a boss. This podcast is also brought to you by Parlay Play Fantasy Sports. Use my referral code RotoBrady. Get that sweet, sweet, sweet deposit bonus. They got paid contests coming to a state near you, giving out boosts, slashing lines, bonuses all day long. Check it out. Get into some DFS player prop contests. It's a real fun platform over there. And what is up, everybody? This is Brady Grove bringing you episode 158 of RotoBaller's official MMA podcast. Tap that, and we've got UFC 309 this weekend.
Break out the red panties.
So a very, very, very quick note on last week, UFC Vegas 100. Carlos Paredes is the man. If he could very likely, he's not going to win it, but he could be fighter of the year for 2024 with the performances he's turned in, smoking 8 to 10 darts a day. What are you going to say? I mean, he clipped Neil Magny, almost with his pinky knuckle and put him absolutely to sleep. Had him in danger before that. I can't wait to see who he fights next. And Rainier de Ritter, in an absolute war with Gerald Meerschaert and ends up getting the submission victory. People are going to bitch, moan, and complain about it. Dude, cool. I'm glad de Ritter says the stuff that he says about one. For God's sake, somebody needed to say it. Criticisms of the UFC aside, he's with the UFC now, and he's clearly happier to be there. I don't know what to tell you, he's happier to be there than he is to be with one. Maybe that'll change at some point, because it definitely changed for him with one. But, and then what other complaints? Just that that people are saying that all other organizations are garbage. Dude, you can't, watch MMA and actually have that opinion. That doesn't make any sense when there's so many fighters that make the transition over to the UFC and hop in the top 15 very quickly. There's a reason Kaya Sakura is getting an immediate title shot. There's a reason Starboy had the standing that he did when he came over. There is a reason that Michael Chandler was a hair away from winning the UFC lightweight title against Charles Oliveira after being, the Bellator king for so long. You just must not watch those organizations if you think that they're all garbage. And what does that mean? That is the most mouth-breather-ass explanation of something ever. That's the same people that say that the UFC sucks. So I don't think you're fans of MMA if you hate every single mixed martial arts product in the world. I don't think you like the sport. Obviously, nothing's perfect, and we're always quick to call out, to be critical of things that we should be critical of, because there's a lot of them. But for God's sake, de Ritter says that, one treated him horribly, and it's like, oh, now he's going to pander to the UFC. And it's like, well, he's clearly happier there, man. That obviously pisses a lot of people off that he's, at least for right now, happy to be with the UFC. I don't know what that means right now, but anyway, those are the takeaways from UFC Vegas 100 real quick. It is late on Wednesday, November 13th. So it's a big week in mixed martial arts. There is Cage Warriors, Hell in Boxing, Jake Paul versus Mike Tyson, the Zerto versus Billiam Smith fight, KSW 100, Ryzen has an event starting late Saturday night. I believe that one's going to be free. Stay up, make some coffee, tune in. There's Game Bread MMA. There's Karate Combat this week. For my picks on all of that stuff and more, it's a busy week. Follow me on Twitter at RotoBrady. Follow the podcast at Tap That MMA Podcast on YouTube and Spotify. Check out my MMA DFS Value Picks article. That comes out on Friday afternoons. I will also, there will be a UFC 309 Fighters to Look Out For slideshow coming out on MSN. This might be a one-off thing, so check it out while it's relevant and out there. That was a fun thing for me to put together. Shout out to RotoBaller for reaching out to me about it. And then come out to the Rotoballer MMA Discord on Saturday. You know, my good friend Ilyas Mamadaliev is going to be fighting here in Newport, Kentucky on Saturday. I have my ticket for Ohio Combat League 33, so I'll be taking that in as well. Taking in as many combat sports as I can this Saturday. Tapology is being a bitch today. Might have to go off of it. We'll see. We'll see. It keeps saying page is unresponsive. Anyway, let's see. Come out to the Rotoballer MMA Discord. Let's talk about DFS and sports betting strategy, what you're doing for UFC 309. There's strong feelings everywhere for UFC 309. You might have seen, you might have heard, there's been a lot of internet debate about it. John Bones Jones says that if he beats Stipe, he does not want to defend the heavyweight title against the interim champion, Tom Aspinall. He would rather do some fun fights for his legacy, either against Poatan or Jamal Hill.
Why'd you do that, buddy? Why'd you do that? Oh, come on, man. What?
That's a fun sound effect I found on YouTube. Dude, he's doing this on purpose. He's got to be. John Jones does this stuff. If it's supposed to make us hate him, it works. It works every time. I fall for it, hook, line, and sinker. I don't believe that John Jones can be that crazy to think that Tom Aspinall doesn't deserve it when he's the interim champion. People will get on the internet and defend John Jones like crazy and say Tom Aspinall hasn't beaten anybody. Dude, he's the defending heavyweight champion. He cleared it all out and made it look easy. And also, I don't give a shit about John Jones' legacy. Look, as a professional athletes and as professional athletes, and then as the audience and the fans, they don't owe us anything. We don't owe them anything. We don't owe John Jones some fight that we don't want to see. Now, look, people are going to watch this for sure. Are they going to pay for pay-per-views for it? Are they going to be happy about it, that this matchup's being forced down our throats? Of course no one's trying to disrespect Stipe, but it doesn't change the fact that the dude's been away, hasn't won in years, has been away from the sport for years. Everybody loves Stipe. He's a great guy, but for God's sake, he's 43 years old. And we're going to get to that main event here in a second. But I don't care about what is good for John Jones' legacy. We're concerned about finding out who the best heavyweight in the world is. That's what this sport is about. And so I really hope that it doesn't turn into like another long delay. If Poatan goes to heavyweight and somehow Tom Aspinall is left defending an interim belt simultaneously, that would be insane. If John Jones fights Jamal Hill at light heavyweight, whatever. He's got to be doing this on purpose, and that's okay. John Jones does a lot of stuff on purpose. He does a lot of stuff on accident. Anyway, we've got 13 fights on this card, starting off with the women's flyweight matchup between Veronica Hardy and Eduarda Mora. Eduarda Mora is the plus 120 underdog. Veronica Hardy, the minus 140 favorite. Veronica Hardy, someone that I slept on 3 fights in a row. Maybe not against Jamie Lynn Horth, but absolutely against J.J. Aldrich. Probably did against Juliana Miller, honestly, and that one looks so bad in hindsight. Now, she was away from the UFC for almost 3 years on the dot. Has come back and won 3 straight decisions, 1 split decision against Jamie Lynn Horth. And, has been very consistent, landed between 36 and 62 strikes in those fights. She did take down Juliana Miller 4 times. That's not saying a whole lot. Her fights are close, but, that's 3 straight decisions. And I don't remember, exactly thinking that that Jamie Lynn Horth was the rightful victor there. So credit to Veronica Hardy. She has come back, and like people do, I used to look at a hiatus from the UFC as a downside, and lately it seems like it's the opposite. Look at Yusuf Zaleo. So then Eduarda Mora, coming off a split decision loss against Denise Gomez, June of this year. She got outstruck 50-18, did have 5 takedowns. She also has wins over Montserrat Ruiz is the most notable, who she knocked out in the second round, outstruck her 57-5. Has a Contender Series win by submission in the first round. This is a tough one, right? Like, I think that Eduardo Mora was able to keep it close with Denise Gomez by getting 5 takedowns, despite the lack of success that she had on the feet. And Denise Gomez, has now won 4 of her last 5. Her only loss being to Angela Hill in that stretch of time. I think this fight going the distance, by the way, is over 2.5 is minus 325. That tells you a lot of what you need to know. I think the more likely of the two fighters to win inside the distance here is Eduardo Mora, I suppose. That's plus 300. Veronica Hardy, the favorite, is plus 600 to win this fight inside the distance. So not crazy rewards there. Veronica Hardy by split decision is plus 500. Mora by split decision is plus 750. I can't fault either of those. But Hardy by decision's minus 125. I think that this 3-fight winning streak, it's been rock solid, and I think maybe Eduardo Mora keeps it a little bit more. Maybe it just ends up a little bit closer in the striking numbers. Maybe she doesn't get Veronica Hardy down 5 times, like she was able to against Denise. I think Veronica Hardy is the safer pick here at minus 125. I think she probably wins this fight I think she probably wins this fight 55 times out of 100. Minus 140 is fair. By decision, minus 125, I think is the way to go. I'd be comfortable with Mora too, plus 120 on the money line. And I don't think there's any need to try to predict a method of victory for Eduardo Mora. I don't know. This is one that it's close as the odds have it. I would not fault anybody from staying away from this. But Eduardo Mora, just a little bit less proven. And especially with the numbers that she put up against Denise Gomez. Now, who knows what the New York judging is going to be like. I could see it being all over the place. But, it was a close performance with Denise Gomez. But Veronica Hardy has, really looked a lot better since coming back to the UFC. That's where my confidence lies. Not in either of these two in DFS. And unless it just ends up very convenient pricing for, where your budget tends to give you an opening. Next up, we got a welterweight matchup between Basil Hafez and Oban Elliott. Oban Elliott, I believe, is a Welshman. I would like to confirm that here before going any further. Yeah, that's Wales's flag. He is 11-2 as a pro, and he is the minus 280 favorite. Hafez, the plus 240 underdog. Hafez. Oh, boy. So, very strange results here, right? In his UFC debut, he loses a split decision to Jack Della Maddalena. Now, the fight was not close statistically on paper. 83-32 in the striking for JDM. 3 takedowns to 1 for Hafez. It was a split decision. It's crazy to look back at that one for where JDM's at now. And then his only win in the UFC, June of this year at UFC 302, is by unanimous decision over Mickey Gall, outstriking him 95-83, 3 takedowns to 1.
But I'm not impressed by your performance, and I look forward to.
There's not a ton of fights at welterweight that you could win in the UFC that at middleweight or at heavyweight that I say ooh, that doesn't mean a whole lot to me. Mickey Gall is one of those dudes. Oban Elliott, on the other hand, 3-0 in the UFC, 3 decisions. Counting the Contender Series, and he survived a knockdown against Val Woodburn back in February of this year. He's 2-0 in the year 2024, both on UFC pay-per-view events. Outstriking Woodburn 70-23, 3 takedowns to 2, and then he outstruck Preston Parsons 44-36, 1 takedown each. So, not to take too much away from Hafez, because he gets a win against a guy that he probably should have beaten. I don't remember what the odds were, but I think Mickey Gall was probably a slight underdog. Oban Elliott has just proven it multiple times, against a more consistent class of opponent. I just don't it's not that I want to take credit away from Hafez for having a split decision loss to JDM. It's just that that fight, calling it a split decision doesn't really accurately portray the competitiveness level of that fight. So, if Hafez was able to survive JDM, though, I think he can survive Oban Elliott. There's a reason that over 2.5 in this fight is minus 275. I actually think that this fight does probably go the distance. I think Hafez can survive this, just like he did against JDM, and Oban Elliott hasn't finished an opponent from the Contender Series through the UFC. I think that minus 280 is very fair for Oban Elliott. I think he probably wins this fight like 70 to 75 times out of 100, maybe more, maybe up to 80. But like Oban Elliott by decision is minus 125. Probably where I'm going with that. And hell, this is maybe another one like Oban Elliott by split decision or majority decision is plus 800. That's not crazy thinking, but I think if you just go Oban Elliott by decision minus 125, I think that's very fair. And if Hafez was like, I don't know, plus 400, maybe that'd be worthwhile. But he's not. Plus 240 is not enough rewards for me here to gamble with him against Oban Elliott. Yeah, like, I wish that Oban Elliott was fighting somebody else. But it's just hard to get a read on Hafez from those first two fights in the UFC. Next up, we got another welterweight matchup. And speak of the devil, we got Mickey Gall versus Ramiz Brahimaj. Mickey Gall is the minus 140 favorite. Ramiz the plus 120 underdog. Let's start off talking about the great Mickey Gall. Mickey Gall has lost 3 in a row, dating back to December of 2021. 3 losses in a row. Granted, the first 2 were to Alex Morono and Mike Malott. It's crazy how many like pay-per-views Mickey Gall has been a part of. You know, I mean, this dude beat Sage Northcutt and CM Punk in a row. All right, that is a very interesting class of rock star that you were able to take out in a row. Not only you take out CM Punk, and you know I think the UFC expected that. That was, you know, the point of that fight was just for CM Punk to make the appearance. It was a sideshow, sure, but I don't hate CM Punk like so many other people do. You know, whatever. I think he actually looked better than I would have expected him to in his time in the UFC. And then you derail the hype train of Sage Northcutt. You know, like Mickey Gall has been in there with some decent names. Mike Perry, Diego Sanchez, Randy Brown. Lost to all those guys. He's lost to every, like, credible name that he's faced. And the activity level has not been there for him over the last few years. He's not even an old dude, born in 1992. He's on a 3-fight losing streak, 2 of which were by decision. One was to Basile Hafez. That was the most recent one at UFC 302. Ramiz Brahimaj, you know, losses to Max Griffin, Court McGee, Thimba Garimbo. He looked horrible against Thimba Garimbo. That was May of this year. Outstruck 43-3, 5 takedowns to 1. He has a submission against Michael Gilmore, who is no longer in the UFC, and that was well over 2 years ago, closer to 3 years ago than 2. Really thoroughly beaten by Court McGee. His other win was back in August in 2021, a submission against Sasha Politnikov. You know, like the 2 UFC wins, both by submission, both in the first round, both against not good opponents, got dominated, you know, pretty much by everybody else that he fought of similar quality. I think this fight is, like, actually well within Mickey Gall's range somehow. I mean, I don't think he's going to submit Mickey Gall early, and I think that would be his best hope. I think if anybody's more likely to get the submission, I guess it would be Mickey Gall. I don't know. I think that this fight is appropriately handicapped. I think it's kind of like right on the dot. I think Mickey Gall wins this fight like 55 times out of 60. I think like the resume is just like slightly more impressive. Over 2.5 is minus 175. I think that's actually getting into a better number here. Otherwise, I would take the fight to end in like round 1. Like if you're not going this fight to go the distance, I think maybe it ends in round 1 with one of them just like snapping a quick submission or a quick knockout or TKO even. This is such a weird matchup to have on UFC 309. I don't know. Gall minus 140 I think is just fine. Gall by decision plus 200. Forget that. I'm not picking a method of victory. If you're going a method of victory, go Ramiz Brahimaj by submission plus 450. But I have no confidence in that at all. Just go Mickey Gall money line minus 140, and I don't feel good about that either. So weird to me to be expressing confidence in a professional UFC fighter with a 7-6 record. The combined record of these two guys is 17-11. Rare for a UFC pay-per-view event, especially one of this magnitude. Next up, we've got a heavyweight matchup. Now it's getting good. Marcin Tybura and Jonata Deniz at heavyweight.
Break out the red panties.
Denise, of course, was supposed to fight Derek Lewis 2 weeks ago. That didn't end up happening. Denise was one of my fighters to watch on the slideshow thing I put out this week. I think it'll be coming out on Friday. Denise is the plus 126 underdog. Tybura the minus 146 favorite. So let's talk about Marcin Tybura. You can never keep this guy down for that long. He's never lost more than 2 fights in a row in the UFC, and what has been a long time in the UFC. Hell, 5-fight winning streak from February of 2020 to June of 2021 over Sergey Spivak, Maxine Grishin, Ben Rothwell, Greg Hardy, and Walt Harris. 5, 7, 8. He's won 8 of his last 11 fights. The other 3, Alexander Romanov, Blagoy Ivanov, and Tai Tuivasa. The only 3 guys to beat him in that time, Alexander Volkov, current interim champion, soon to be true champion, maybe. I don't know. That's not the point. You get what I'm saying. Tom Aspinall. And then he just got subbed in round 1 against Sergey Spivak. That was August of this year in a rematch between the two, because what else are you going to do at heavyweight between the numbers of like 13 and 6 right now? So, he's subbed Tai Tuivasa. I don't expect that to happen in this one. Marcin Tybura is as rock solid as it gets at heavyweight. A guy that will never fight for a title, never really even got that close. But he's always there. His workload has been pretty consistent. He's already fought twice in 2024. He's always there to headline. He's been the main event of the last 3 events that he was in. Crazy. And it just takes a world-class guy over the last few years to actually beat Marcin Tybura. And I think that it was also a point of how much Sergey Spivak has improved since they first fought. Not like Marcin Tybura being washed, but just that Sergey Spivak got better since their first fight. Yonata Deniz, former professional kickboxing champion, had that first-round knockout on the Contender Series against Eduardo Neves, September of 2023. Gets a knockout against Austin Lane, who just beat Robelis not too long ago. Had him as the plus 300 underdog on Wager Wars, if you recall. That was just back in April. And here's where it gets dicey, is Deniz beats Carl Williams, outstrikes him 59-29, gets taken down twice. Carl Williams should have had 8 takedowns in that fight. I will never understand what happened for as long as I live.
But I'm not impressed by your performance, and I look forward to...
The excuse was Carl Williams was trying to fight more exciting because he was afraid he was going to get cut. Well, dude, forget that. You lost the fight. You were on your way up in this division. You were going to be undeniable. Maybe you wouldn't have been the brass's favorite, but you know what people don't want to see Carl Williams do is kickbox. If you don't think they want to see him lay and pray, which isn't really as much what he does, but if you don't want to see him get 8 takedowns and ride that to a win, you sure as hell don't want to see Carl Williams kickbox. I digress. So it's hard to say how much that win for Deniz actually means against Carl Williams, because he wasn't really fighting Carl Williams. He was fighting Carl Williams trying to kickbox, which doesn't make any sense. And he really just kind of cruised to that win. I think that at this point, I do think that it is logical that Tybura is the favorite. Deniz, this is a big step up in competition either way. It was going to be whether he fought Derek Lewis or whether he fought Tybura. I think that that's a weird spot for Deniz to be in. You're preparing for 2 very different heavyweight guys that have been ranked for a while. And Tybura is ready and is pretty much going to be almost the exact same product no matter who he's paired against. It makes sense that he's the favorite. I want to give credit to Deniz because even though he's 33 years old, he's really one of the prospects at heavyweight, because you can be a prospect at heavyweight up to 34 years old. Hell, Robelis was briefly a prospect, and that dude's going to be brushing 40 soon. So I would love to see Deniz be successful here. I just don't know if he has a well-rounded enough MMA game to do that. I don't think Tybura gives a damn about how exciting he looks in this one. I think he wants to win this fight, and he's good at that. It hasn't been much at knockouts in a while. I think Deniz by knockout could very easily happen, because Tybura is getting up there in age. Tybura was born in 1985. He's pushing 40 for real. And, he won't even have like a size advantage like he sometimes does. I think if you're going Deniz, plus 126 money line isn't enough. And I'm not touching an over-under in this fight either because it could go so many different ways. I don't feel it. This is why it's almost even money for over 1.5. Too close to call for me. It could, they're two guys in way too different spots. I just don't know the real Yonata Deniz yet. Obviously, he's a great kickboxer. But Marcin Tybura is just so rock solid and well-rounded. Those are the two phrases I will always use describing Marcin Tybura. So Deniz by knockout plus 110 is the way to go, I think, if you're going with him. Tybura by decision plus 400 because I think he's going to have to be careful. He could even be rocked at one point. But will this dude find a way to steal 2 rounds, especially like after round 1 if he survives a flurry? For sure. And could this end up being a split decision for Tybura? Let's say he gets rocked like in the first round, comes back and wins the other 2 rounds. And one or two judges gives it a 10-8. Tybura by split or majority decision plus 1,100, that could very easily happen. Tybura money line I'm comfortable with, minus 146. I do think he wins this fight like 60 to 65 times out of 100. Tybura by decision plus 400, probably the most logical way to go. I'm mostly interested to see, like, if Yonata Deniz wins this fight and looks good doing it, then, like, I can completely forget about what happened against Carl Williams. And it's not his fault what happened against Carl Williams, but it doesn't mean that I can, like, say that I have a, like, great picture of what he's like as an MMA fighter against this level of competition right now. And I could see using both these guys in DFS. I don't think either of them will be too expensive, and I think both of them, like, have their value, like, I think, like, if Tybura wins, I think, like, it's probably you're probably not scoring in the triple digits, but I think it'll be just a fine score, and Deniz will, end up being cheaper, and I think that's a little bit more of a Hail Mary. Oh, so weird. And we're going to get to a couple more super weird ones. But now we got a lightweight matchup, a late replacement matchup. We got David Onama at lightweight against Roberto Romero. UFC newcomer Roberto Romero. David Onama is a minus 1,000 favorite. Roberto Romero is the plus 700 underdog. So let's start off with Roberto Romero, 8-3-1. This 8-3-1 is a pro, 24 years old. And David Onama was originally supposed to fight Lucas Almeida. And I believe that was just a recent development. So, and by the way, Nikita Krylov and Azamat Murzakanov getting canceled from this card is a real shame. I was very interested. I don't think the hope is even lost on Nikita Krylov. I mean, at light heavyweight, who the hell knows right now? And Azamat, that would have been a big win for him. But, like, that was an actual, like, high leverage fight that I'm sad to see is no longer at UFC 309. But that is what led to Roberto Romero at 8-3-1 as a professional getting his UFC debut. His nickname is El Charro Negra. Pretty sweet nickname. Again, 24 years old. He is a featherweight. This, now, Tapology is saying that this fight is happening at featherweight. I think that it actually is. I have seen that more and more, but UFC Stats is saying lightweight. Anyway, he comes in from Combate Global. And, like, decent record of the last few opponents that he's fought. He's spent a while in Combate Global. And let's say 3 knockouts, 2 submissions, 3 decisions. He hasn't even, like, he's only won 1 of his last 2 fights. You go back to December of 2023, he lost a unanimous decision to 5-2 Patrick Lehane. Patrick Lehane, it's Combate Global, so I'm going to go with a saucier pronunciation. But, like, he's had a fine run in Combate Global, just not like a guy that you would expect to be fed to David Onama, and he wouldn't be if it was not dire circumstances. Onama, on the other hand, does he deserve to be a minus 1,000 favorite? You bet your bottom dollar he deserves to be a minus 1,000 favorite. Roberto Romero.
Don't do this. You cannot do this,
Look, David Onama, 4-2 in the UFC. Losses to Mason Jones by unanimous decision, a competitive unanimous decision. Outstruck him 90-87. He did get taken down 8 times. That's a problem. And then the other losses to Nate Landwehr in what was an amazing fight, if you recall, August of 2022 at the Vera vs. Cruz fight night. He got a knockdown. He was very close. He was hairs away from winning that fight at different points. And if it was not for the incredible tenacity of Nate Landwehr, he would be on a 5-fight winning streak right now. Wins over Gabriel Benitez, okay. That was a first-round knockout. A submission of Garrett Armfield. A knockout over Gabriel Santos June of last year. And then a unanimous decision victory April of this year over Jonathan Pierce, outstriking him 58-57. 5 takedowns for Pierce. Didn't matter. So, look, I think, like, credit to Roberto Romero for stepping in. I'm sure they're going to throw him proverbially a bone for, this, for stepping in and at least keeping David Onama on the card. I think that, like, this is another instance, kind of like the Zach Scroggin fight last week, that it would just be better if you just canceled this fight. It's not fair. I mean, it is fair. Roberto Romero is a grown man. He can choose what to do. But, this could be a brutal spot. This is not one where I think David Onama is at risk of getting caught off guard. I just think Roberto Romero is going to get smothered in this one. I think David Onama is well worth the price that he's going to be in DFS this week. Minus 1,000, I think, is very fair. This is a guy that would not be in the UFC if it was not for dire circumstances. The under 1.5 is intriguing at plus 105. I think David Onama has dispatched of better opponents in shorter time. I think, like, Romero inside the distance in a parlay. Did I say Romero? Onama inside the distance in a parlay, or like Onama by knockout. Probably the way to go. Maybe Onama in round 1. I could see all those plays. I could see all of those. This is just not one where I think that anybody's overreacting and giving Onama too much credit. He has been on a very nice 4 or 5 fight streak dating back to February of 2022. And a win over Jonathan Pierce, even though, like, Pierce has now lost 3 in a row, that dude's rock solid. Nate Landwehr, rock solid. Armfield, super rock solid, even though he's on a 2-fight losing streak. So, maybe Onama has a ceiling, but it is stories and stories above where Roberto Romero, where his ceiling is at. Maybe in due time, but there's just not enough there and not enough dominance in combate for him. I think Onama wins this fight like 85-90. No, I think he wins this fight like 95 times out of 100, maybe 99. So I would expect this to be quick and easy work for David Onama. If it's not, it's no big deal. It's a weird circumstance. But I don't think Onama's going to, like, rest on his laurels here. I think he wants to make it an easy Saturday. Next up, we got a lightweight matchup between Jim Miller and Damon Jackson. Oh, boy. Here, that deserves it.
Break out the red panties.
Yeah, Jim Miller is the plus 150 underdog. Damon Jackson, the minus 175 favorite. Let's talk about Damon Jackson first. Actually, has lost 3 of his last 4 fights. Got knocked out by Danny Ige. Lost a unanimous decision to Billy Q. Coming off of a unanimous decision loss to Chepe Mariscal, getting outstruck 73-32, 5 takedowns to 1. Damon Jackson was born in 1988, so the combined age here is geriatric. But he does have a win April of this year by split decision over Alexander Hernandez, outstriking him 42-32, 3 takedowns, surviving a knockdown by Alexander the Great. He had a great solid 4-fight winning streak between October of 2021 and September of 2022. Beat Charles Rosa, Camilla Kirk, Dan Argueta, Pat Sabatini. Damon Jackson has been around for a good amount of time. His first UFC fight was August of 2014 on the Dillashaw vs. Soto card. So he's been around for a while. Speaking of been around for a while, there's this guy who was born August 30th, 1983. A10 Jim Miller. And this is right on the border for him. Like, Jim Miller's first fight in the UFC was a UFC 89, headlined by Bisping versus Lieben. That was a pay-per-view headliner, by the way, back in the day. So, use that as some perspective. But no need to go through, the mini fight. Let's talk about what he's done since October of 2021. He's actually won 5 of his last 7 fights. The best names on there is like Cowboy, who he subbed. He knocked out Nicholas Mata. And then, like, the last 2 of 3 because he too fought Alexander Hernandez and lost, got outstruck 108 to 67. That was he got kind of battered in that one. And the wins that he's had in between, finishes against Gabriel Benitez and Jesse Butler, those do not mean much to me. Not at all. They can't. The dude, he was born in 1983. It's amazing he is still here. I hope that no matter what the result is, that this is nothing but a celebration of the fact that Jim Miller is fighting for the third time in 2024 at his age. And he is coming off that devastating loss to Bobby King Green at UFC 300. I still hold out hope that Jim Miller will be able to make an appearance at UFC 400. Let's see. No soundbite. That's unnecessary. Look, Jim Miller.
Nick, one comment, man. One comment.
Oh, don't be scared, homie.
And you know that. There's you have a magic that many fighters, even guys that have been champions, would should pine for. There is no real common analysis or rule of thumb for Jim Miller. He is a different kind of animal. No one has done what he has done, and somehow never fighting for a title, but that's beside the point. Jim Miller has set records just from being an absolute beast, the longevity that he's had. Again, I hope that no matter what the result, that this is nothing but a celebration of, Jim Miller's career. Having said that, I do think Damon Jackson at this point in his career, I think I think that has some more recent impressive wins. Alexander Hernandez is the one that I think of. And his last knockout was actually over 2 years ago. So Jim Miller has obviously shown the ability to survive a lot of damage, and I hope it doesn't come to that. But, I think Damon Jackson, could kind of do, maybe similar, split the difference of what he did against Hernandez and what he, the way that he, lost against Billy Q or something. I think Damon Jackson can land, 70, 80, 90 strikes in this fight, and I think Jim Miller will keep pace. I think that there'll be some really exciting moments here. Ultimately, I don't think Damon Jackson puts him away. I think Damon Jackson, money line minus 175, I think is more than fair. Over 1.5 is minus 260. That's a weird spot to have it at. But Damon Jackson by decision plus 150, I think that's if you're looking for plus money, that's the way to go. I think if you're going Jim Miller, if you're going Jim Miller, just go Jim Miller inside the distance. That's plus 165. Oh, really not a ton of reward there. That doesn't make any sense. Jim Miller by submission plus 700, by knockout is plus 300. Inside the distance is plus 165. Okay, never mind. That's not a great reward when he's plus 150. Just take him money line, if that's how you feel. And this is maybe a situation where you bet with the heart as opposed to the head. But if you're trying to bet with the old noggin, unfortunately, Damon Jackson money line and Damon Jackson by decision, I think, are the way to go. I think he does win this fight probably 65 times out of 100. But again, there is no rule of thumb for the magic that Jim Miller brings in. It's a magic that Damon Jackson doesn't have, but I think he has enough left in the tank to overcome that. That's one for the people, and I hope that it ends with a round of a great, applause and ovation, no matter what. Speaking of which, now we got a middleweight fight between Chris Weidman and Eric Anders. Chris Weidman is the minus 105 underdog. Eric Anders, the minus 115 favorite. I don't know if I'm surprised by that or not. So let's start off with Eric Anders. As I'm sure you all know, former college football champion with the Alabama Crimson Tide. So all over the place, the activity has not been there, over the last couple of years for him. Obviously Eric Anders, born in 1987, a guy who is no spring chicken himself. He has fought, a lot of great fighters. They fed him to Lyoto Machida in a fight night main event, way too early. And, he lost a split decision. But he's taken losses to Thiago Santos. The hell am I talking about? Thiago Santos, Khalil Roundtree, Christoph Jotko, Andre Muniz, Jung Young Park, Marc-Andre Barrialt. Wins over Gerald Mearshart, Darren Stewart, Kyle Dawkins as recent as December 2022, which more speaks about where Kyle Dawkins was at the time. That was a second-round knockout. Now, here's the problem. Eric Anders, his last fight. It was a win. It should be a credit to him. But I can't credit it to him because it was against Jamie Pickett, March of this year. Outstruck him 23-20. Got the 5 takedowns, which was, the key to that because Jamie Pickett knocked him down. Yikes. So that's a bad spot to be in. Eric Anders, credit him for sticking around as long as he has. I can't believe that fight with Machida was in 2018. It feels like it was so much longer ago. If you told me that fight was in 2010, I wouldn't have been, super shocked. He's always had a ceiling. We always knew what that ceiling was. It was just above the very middle of the line at middleweight. He's had some, decent wins against recognizable, but, even some of those wins were, very close. Like the Mearshart, that was a split decision. He's gotten some knockouts, some decent ones over that period of time. Chris Weidman, all right, to go to him now. Obviously, what a saga it has been. I don't like going with home crowd stuff. I do think it will matter here. I think, that's something. Chris Weidman just strikes me as a guy where that will work to his advantage. Fighting in New York in Madison Square Garden, that's going to be a big deal. All the eye pokes against Bruno Silva aside, Chris Weidman looked good in that fight back in March against Bruno Silva. Again, eye pokes aside. But, after that, I can definitely cut him a little bit of slack for the fight after, when he finally made his return at UFC 292, lost by unanimous decision to Brad Tavares in kind of predictable fashion. And that was the first fight after that devastating injury against Uriah Hall. Really, he's won 2 of his last 4. And, even going back a little further, the losses were to Dominic Reyes and to Jacare Souza, both by, he got knocked out in both of those. But, this guy's been around forever, too. After winning the heavyweight, the middleweight title against Anderson Silva, one of the greatest upsets the sport has ever known, with just, wins over Damian Maia and Mark Munoz. It's always the guys that get the title shots where you're like, really? After that? It's always those guys that are the most dangerous, upset, options. Sean Strickland was another one. So, I guess exclusively at middleweight because it didn't work for Alex Perez. But he defended that title 3 times. Before losing it to Luke Rockhold. So, I actually think that off just the spirit of their last performances, and I think you have to do that for 2 guys that were born in the 80s, Chris Weidman didn't look bad against Bruno Silva. He was the one dishing out the damage. Again, eye pokes aside, my takeaway from that fight after the eye pokes was actually that Chris Weidman looked way better than I expected him to. And Eric Anders should have devastated Jamie Pickett. And he was actually lucky to come out with that win. He is not going to be able to take Chris Weidman 5 times, take him down 5 times like he was able to against Jamie Pickett. Hell, give me Chris Weidman minus 105 as the slight underdog. I think he wins this fight 55 to 60 times out of 100. I don't necessarily. I think that this fight probably goes the distance. Over 2.5 minus 215. This is another, they might go, I know they're going back to the other gloves for this event, I guess for the whole card. So maybe we'll see an uptick in knockouts, but really it's been a smarter thing to, go more heavily on decisions over this past year since the gloves, I guess, but there's just been lesser finishes anyway. Weidman by decision plus 175, I don't think you need to do that. I think, either of these guys is probably, 50-50 split in likelihood to end up getting a knockout. For Weidman, it's plus 625. For Anders, it's plus 400. That's splitting too many hairs for me in a matchup of, again, guys whose age adds up to, someone who could have been in the Korean War. Chris Weidman, straight up minus 105. I think that's the way to go. I can't believe it, but I have way more confidence in him than Eric Anders, considering each of their last two performances. And hell, if you can sneak in a couple of eye pokes and get some home cooking and not lose a point, I guess all the better in Madison Square Garden. I think those New York fans would eat it up. Next up, we've got a bantamweight matchup, a bantamweight banger between Jonathan Martinez and Marcus the Maniac McGee. Marcus McGee is the minus 130 favorite. Jonathan Martinez, the plus 110 underdog. Let's start off then with Jonathan Martinez, all right? Was on an awesome 6-fight winning streak from October of 2021 to October of 2023. And it really picked up the pace. You know, like after he got the Cub Swanson knockout, October of 2022, then he beat Said Nurmagomedov by unanimous decision March of 2023, and then got that knockout via leg kicks. Now, in a fight where he was getting, like, eaten up at first by Adrian Yanez, but it was the leg kicks eventually just took way too much of a toll. He does that. Like, Jonathan Martinez zigs when you zag. He's a crafty fighter, and we saw that again against Adrian Yanez. The question was, like, was that his ceiling? Or, you know, is Jose Aldo, again, like, we know he's a different animal, and we saw it. Jonathan Martinez was, I believe, the favorite going in against Jose Aldo. And Aldo, you know, made some rather easy work of him, outstriking him 77-52. That was Martinez's most recent fight, UFC 301, May of this year. Marcus McGee, 3 finishes in the UFC since debuting April of 2023 against Journey Newson with a rear naked choke, then 2 knockouts in a row against JP Buys and Gaston Bolanos. Now, Gaston Bolanos did look good in his last fight against Cortavius Romeus. That was just this past week that he won by unanimous decision. Pretty easy work for him. He's a former pro kickboxer, you know. But the JP Buys win means absolutely nothing to me. I think that Jonathan Martinez is getting, like, you know, just a little... he's getting slept on just a little bit too much for, you know, wins against Said Nurmagomedov and Adrian Yanez. I cannot fault somebody for losing to Jose Aldo, especially when you don't play the Mario Batista game. So I think it makes sense. Like, Marcus McGee is the more likely of the two to get a finish, just because that's like how his whole career has gone. I think it's like 8 knockouts, 1 submission in his 9 victories. Marcus McGee inside the distance is plus 165. And I think Marcus McGee probably wins like 52 to 55 of these out of 100, perhaps. But I think Jonathan Martinez plus 110, I think that is very fair game. I think that, like, that's probably the individual number I like the most. I don't feel the need to go with a method of victory for Martinez, because I think he's going to have to get creative to avoid the, you know, the big finishing moves of Marcus McGee. I'm very interested to watch Marcus McGee here. He is 34 years old. He only has 3 fights in the UFC. It's kind of now, it's go time now or never for Marcus McGee to make a strong run up the bantamweight weight class. But, like, I can't sleep on Jonathan Martinez that strong when Marcus McGee, you know, when these are the wins that you have. You know, a JP Buys win, it tells me nothing. It only tells me that you belong in the UFC, or that you don't, that you're not at the absolute bottom of the UFC, because JP Buys in the UFC ended up 1-5, and that's counting the Contender Series. So he only ended up with 1 win on the Contender Series, and then lost 4 fights in a row in the UFC against Montel Jackson, Bruno Silva, Cody Durden, Marcus McGee. So, you know, it's not like it was an easy path, but you got to get some wins. So I'm not giving up on Jonathan Martinez. I think plus 110 is very fair. I like that. And if you're going Marcus McGee, I think plus 165 inside the distance is a very nice number. I like both these guys in DFS. I could see me using them both. You know, I think that they'll be fairly priced, and I think I can work them in. Next up, we got a lightweight matchup between Mauricio Rufy and James On Top. Rufy of the Fighting Nerds is the minus 800 favorite. On Top, the Peruvian, the plus 550 underdog. So, let's talk first about Mauricio Rufi, who was supposed to have a different opponent. James On Top steps in. Credit to him. Rufi with 2 knockouts, counting the Contender Series at the UFC level. The first one was in round 3 against Ramon Magomedeliev, outstriking him 70-60 up into that finish in the 3rd round. And then he got a knockout in the first round at UFC 301 against Jamie Malarkey. Malarkey, for the things that you might be able to say about him, ultimately, that dude is 5-6 in the UFC. He's fought some really tough guys. He's a veteran, been around since October of 2019, fought on a lot of pay-per-view cards. So a knockout by Rufi over Jamie Malarkey actually does mean something. It's not the case where this fighting nerd has looked very impressive against horrible competition. I think the Malarkey win is just enough for me to say, all right, I'm buying in, especially against an opponent at this level. Because On Top, crafty dude, I think I'm sure you could make some arguments one way or another for the result that he just had August of this year against Vasyslav Borshev. But, now he's got a unanimous decision win against Malik Lewis on the Contender Series September of last year. Malik Lewis is a solid Contender Series kind of guy, and he knocked him down twice. Didn't put him away, but he did knock him down twice and land 74 strikes to 29. And gets subbed by Chris Padilla, April of 2024, and then loses that split decision to Vasyslav Borshev. On Top, 14-4 as a pro. Rufi is 10-1, which is kind of it's always surprising when you see that these guys lost before they got to this point when they're looking this good. But Rufi minus 800, I do think is appropriate here. I think Rufi has been past this point. And the reason this fight is happening is by necessity. And they want to keep putting the fighting nerds out there. Rufi by knockout is minus 200. I think all of his professional wins are by knockout. Maybe one wasn't, but it's been the vast majority. So I don't think there's any reason to super stray away from that. I think that this could be I think On Top's crafty enough to survive, maybe for a little bit. And especially if Rufi, has to take a little bit more time because of the nature of how this matchup was put together. I think over 1.5 rounds minus 175, I think it's a possibility. I think Rufi, in round 2, which is plus 275, is a decent pick. I'd go Rufi maybe in round 2 to try to be clever here, and then Rufi in round 1 is plus 155. But Rufi by knockout minus 200, it's predictable, but it is the most likely outcome. And then I would go Rufi by decision plus 300. Plus 550 isn't even enough for me to take On Top. I think that you would have hoped that he's come up with a win against the guys that he's fought by now. The Malik Lewis win at least tells me that he might be able to last, a little bit longer than maybe people are giving him credit for. But I do think Rufi wins this fight probably 85 times out of 100, maybe 90. And again, knockout in DFS, I think that he is a fantastic selection. And the buy knockout at minus 200, if you want to throw that in a parlay or just, put some safety net money on it, I do think that's the right way to go. And it feels predictable because it is, because this fight could very well go predictably. But yeah, there's been a lot of these lately, and it's I'm going to try to not delve too much into the psychological factors. I just think that, the fighting nerds really seem like they can do no wrong right now, and they got a great thing going. And, it's got to end eventually. I just don't think it ends here. And so I think it's another win in devastating fashion. Next up, we got 4 fights left on the card. We got a women's flyweight matchup between Viviane Araújo and Karine Silva, the lesser of the 2 women's flyweight prospects with the last name Silva. But these are 2 ranked women's flyweights. Karine Silva is the minus 260 favorite. Araújo the plus 220 underdog. Let's start with Viviane Araújo. So, has lost 3 of her last 4. It's hard to blame her too much for that. And she's lost 4 of her last 6. those names that she lost to, and by the way, all of her fights have gone the distance in one way or another, ended in unanimous decision, dating back to July of 2019. So, like, the only fight that hasn't gone the distance and ended in a unanimous decision was her UFC debut at UFC 237, which ended up being a third-round knockout over Talita Bernardo. So, just talking about these last 6 fights, loses a unanimous decision at Caitlin Sermonara, formerly Chikagian, getting outstruck 127-89. Unanimous decision against Andrea Lee, where, she kept it close in the striking, did get rocked by Andrea Lee, but lands 3 takedowns. That was enough. Lands 126 strikes against Alexa Grasso and gets 2 takedowns. Loses that unanimous decision. Gets pieced up by Amanda Ribas at UFC 285. Her most recent win is October of 2023 against Jennifer Maia, who has since moved on to other things. But, she won that despite it was 41-24 for Maia in the striking, 2 takedowns each. Kind of surprised that was unanimous, though I recall, let's see what the actual scores were. 29-28 on all 3 judges' scorecards. Makes sense. And then she's coming off a unanimous decision loss to Natalia Silva, getting outstruck 38-26. She did land 1 takedown. Karine Silva is going to be 7 years younger because Vivian Araujo was born in 1986. Karine Silva has not lost in the UFC. She is 18-4 as a pro. She's got 3 submissions in the UFC against Poliana Botelho, Ketlin Souza, and Mariana Moros. And she is coming off a unanimous decision victory against Ariana Da Silva, getting outstruck 42-27, but she did land 5 takedowns in that fight. Vivian Araujo has only ever been taken down, like, at the most in the UFC, I believe twice, and she was able to match it. I think Karine Silva is going to dedicate some time to, getting some of those takedowns. Because we have yet to, 3 of her fights didn't leave round 1, and I think that, like, she's going to be looking for a submission. I don't think, I think that her goal is just going to be to keep a decent pace on the feet. But the goal is for her to get this to the ground, and I think that she'll probably be able to do that. It's just, like, I do think these odds are a little nuts, especially for women's flyweight. Silva minus 260 seems crazy. I think, like, what's a better money line value? I guess Araujo plus 220. The thing is, like, Vivian Araujo has never been subbed in the UFC, despite all the opponents that she has faced. I think that's going to be a tough way to go. I think Karine Silva is just going to have to get, 2 to 3 takedowns and keep it and don't let Araujo take you down. I think that, and this could be a split decision. I could easily see that. Karine Silva by split decision plus 1,000. Araujo by split plus 750. If you're going Karine Silva, you could go by submission plus 375, but, like, by decision probably is the much more likely outcome, minus 105. Vivian Araujo is going to be incredibly tough to submit. I just think, like, at this point, I could, keep talking about how Araujo is getting, like, majorly slept on here, but she was born in 1986. A 7-year age difference does not tend to go well for the elders, especially when they were born in the 1980s, and again, are pushing 40 years old here in November of 2024. So I don't love anything on this one. Like, Silva by decision, I think this could end up being close, because if Silva has problems getting Araujo down to the ground and keeping her there too many times, then, I think that Araujo is going to have success on the feet, and I think that could, end up with some varied results on the judges' scorecards for certain rounds. I don't feel strongly about this one either way. I think Karine Silva is probably too much of a favorite, but I still don't really like Vivian Araujo for all the reasons I just described. But Araujo, you've been in there with so many tough fighters.
Don't do this. You cannot do this,
I meant this one.
One comment, man. One comment.
No, don't be scared, homie.
Much more logical. But yeah, ranked UFC women's flyweights. I hope that Karine Silva wins. I'm rooting for her because it just is more interesting for that division, if she continues to work her way up. Because once you get past Vivian Araujo's, I think, number 9 ranking, either number 9 or number 8, then the name recognition goes up, exponentially. So it could mean like a high leverage matchup for Karine Silva if she gets a win on a big platform like UFC 309. Next up, and we've got 3 fights remaining, we got a middleweight matchup between the Bear Jew Paul Craig and 6-0 Bo Nickel. Bo Nickel is the minus 1,200 favorite. Paul Craig, the plus 750 underdog. Let's talk about Bo Nickel. You know, highly decorated wrestler, highly touted prospect. They brought him along very steadily, all right, because 2 fights in the Contender Series that ended in devastating fashion. Like, you take that fight against Donovan Beard that ended in that triangle where in a very short span of time, an incredibly short span of time. I'm going to take a sip of coffee real quick. Oh, gross. It's lukewarm, but it is 12:05 a.m. Where we saw him land a big shot, end up on the ground, come out in a triangle choke in the scramble. There were some amazing qualities displayed by Bo Nickel. Every one of his fights, up till the last one, ended in the first round. It was 3 submissions and then a knockout against Val Woodburn. You know, it would be hard to give him credit for wins over Jamie Pickett, Val Woodburn, and Cody Brundage. He did have some trouble with Cody Brundage when, you know, it goes into the second round. You land 3 takedowns, but only 8 strikes. He devastated Val Woodburn and Jamie Pickett, though. You know, he very much looks like a guy that could fight for the middleweight title. I know that there's been future odds for Bo Nickel versus Hamzat on best MMA odds or best fight odds for, like, well over a year now. But, you know, again, it doesn't change the last 3 wins, Jamie Pickett, Val Woodburn, and Cody Brundage. And he had more trouble with Cody Brundage than some expected. And a lot expected. Paul Craig. First fight in the UFC was UFC on Fox, December of 2016. This guy, so losses that he's taken: Khalil Roundtree, Jimmy Crute, Alonzo Minifield, Volkan Oezdemir, Johnny Walker, Brendan Allen, and Cal Borello, another fighting nerd. And now, like, because of those last 4 losses I mentioned, he has now lost 4 of his last 5 fights. Who has Paul Craig beaten in his time in the UFC? Oh, he submitted Magomed Ankalaev back in 2018. Submitted Kennedy and Nchekwu in 2019. Beat Godzimarad and Tigalov. Again, submission. Knocked out Shogun. Knocked out Jamal Hill at UFC 263, former UFC light heavyweight champion. Submitted Nikita Krylov. And he got a second-round knockout against Andre Muniz in his last win, July of 2023. It's crazy. It's crazy. And I don't think that this is a Paul Craig knockout. I'm not even necessarily saying, like, Paul Craig at plus 750 is just downright disrespectful. He's beaten a guy who a lot of people think will be the next, you know, one of the next, you know, number 1 contenders at light heavyweight. They can't deny Magomed Ankalaev for that much longer, right? You can only feed him so many light heavyweights before it's very clear that, like, he's got to be the next one up. But who knows, you know, with Poatan and whatever crazy matchups they're trying to make for him. So it just is crazy disrespectful, even with the age difference. And Paul Craig, born in 1987, he's going to be 9 years older than Bo Nickel here. But plus 750 for a guy with, you know, a win over Andre Muniz as recent as July of 2023. For the gauntlet of fighters he's even had to face, you know, in those 4 losses since July of 2022 when he fought Volkan. For a guy that has beaten Magomed, Nikita Krylov, Jamal Hill, Shogun, how many fighters have beaten that many former number 1 contenders and UFC champions that get disrespected to the level of Paul Craig? Paul Craig.
Nick, one comment, man. One comment.
Oh, don't be scared, homie.
I think plus 750, I do not fault anybody at all for going Paul Craig plus 750. I think this fight goes over 1.5 rounds. If it you know, maybe it's simplistic thinking, but, like, Paul Craig's a difficult puzzle for a lot of people, as we've described. And if Bo Nickel needed to go to the second round against Cody Brundage, you know, this is a guy that is still coming into his own and his true potential as an MMA fighter. Unless he made a significant leap, and he very well might have since his Cody Brundage fight, I think that this fight very well, could go over the 1.5 round mark. Plus 140 there, not too bad. If you're going Paul Craig, just go for broke. Go for the Grand Slam. Paul Craig by submission plus 1,100. There's really no pick for Bo Nickel that I like too much. Nickel in round 2 is plus 275. Nickel inside the distance is minus 700. I don't even know if I'll like him in DFS that much. He's probably going to be, on DraftKings, he'll probably be 94, 95, 9600. Am I trying to shell that out here when I think, does he have more scoring potential from the guys that'll be, slightly cheaper? And do I have more uncertainty about him? So those are the reasons I'm probably not going to be crazy on Bo Nickel this week. I think, the only, if you want to go nickel in round 2 or, nickel in round 3 is plus 500, I think that's where you go. If you're going Bo Nickel, because he does, just on talent alone, what we've seen of him, just the fact that he's like a cyborg. Some of his tools, that he's coming along. But it is very clear that this guy is an incredibly talented guy on the right. And even at 7-0, and even in the middleweight division where Shara Bullet is now in the rankings, it would not be crazy to see Bo Nickel as a ranked fighter after beating Paul Craig. I think that they will want to do that. They want to bring him along gradually. They're going to have to. But they also want to legitimize him as much as possible. And this is a big step in the way. It's a big step up from Brundage and from Jamie Pickett and from Val Woodburn. So I don't love a lot about, betting Bo Nickel in this one when he's that heavy of a favorite. If you want to have some fun, you want to go for broke, Paul Craig money line or Paul Craig by submission. Sprinkle a little bit on it. I think those are the only ones that are worth your time here. I just, I can't get up for, for how crazy these odds are for Nickel and for how much you'd have to split hairs to try to pick the round that he's going to win in to make this worthwhile. And but from the way that we've seen Paul Craig finished before, in the fights that he has lost, I think it's hard to say that Bo Nickel wins by decision. If you're going Bo Nickel plus decision plus 750, I don't know. Just have some fun with that one. Go with Paul Craig by submission plus 1,100. That's going to be a blast. And it's a real possibility. It's a real possibility. The disrespect is crazy on the Bear Jew this week. And now, we are to the co-main event of the evening. A lightweight matchup. A rematch. Charles Oliveira and Michael Chandler. Michael Chandler is the plus 215 underdog. Charles Oliveira, the minus 255 favorite. Michael Chandler.
Nick, one comment, man. One comment.
Oh, don't be scared, homie.
Folks, Michael Chandler has been the subject of a lot of internet jokes. He's politically outspoken. He kind of played himself really hard, waiting so long for a Conor McGregor fight that became more and more apparent was not going to materialize. He talks a lot of shit to people, kind of ends up owning himself on a lot of these. I will not let that take away from the fact. Watching Michael Chandler in Bellator at his height, when he was fighting Benson Henderson and all those guys, when he captured the title multiple times, in some of the greatest fights that I have ever seen, at a period of time where he was basically like the Frankie Edgar of Bellator. People that don't follow anything outside of the UFC and didn't follow the sport like that back when that was happening can't possibly understand. But there was very much an argument at the time, at his height, before he was getting up there in age, that Michael Chandler could have been the best lightweight in the world. And we, remember the devastating knockout against Dan Hooker, which kind of aged a little better. That happened, that's just January 2021 at UFC 257. That was the Poirier-McGregor rematch. And then he fights for the vacant title. And what people remember is Charles Oliveira's finish. Well-deserved. Michael Chandler is not credited with a knockdown in that fight, and that is insane. Watch that first round. Michael Chandler was a millisecond away from being the UFC lightweight champion. I thought they were going to stop it. You could make an argument that in many cases they would have. So Michael Chandler, for all the shit that he takes, was an amazing Bellator champion, and he was millimeters away from being the UFC lightweight champion against Charles Oliveira. And it just so happens that it ended up being a slightly better story that Charles Oliveira, after so much time in the UFC and so many ups and downs, ended up capturing the lightweight title. He has that awesome unanimous decision loss to Justin Gaethje. He had his amazing moments in there too and made Gaethje do the chicken dance multiple times. They landed a combined 219 strikes in that fight. Gets that awesome front kick knockout of Tony Ferguson. Gets subbed by Dustin Poirier. Fought all the BMF dudes. That's where he's at. But, even still, the winner of this fight could end up getting a lightweight title shot. That's where lightweight's at right now. Lightweight is just quasi-BMF, or is BMF quasi-lightweight? When John Jones is talking about fighting Peloton for BMF, then we really don't know what it means. But anyway, even though he's lost 3 of his last 4, just remember that not long ago, he very well could have been the UFC lightweight champion. He really was very close to stealing that fight against Justin Gaethje, and Dustin Poirier is just like a better mixed martial arts fighter. He can handle himself on the feet with Chandler, and he's a great grappler. The thing about Chandler is that, whether it's artificial or not, seeing the way that he could explode out of Charles Oliveira's submission attempts, like we have never seen anybody do, that's an otherworldly ability. Michael Chandler is still a freak athlete, even at his age. I've talked enough about Michael Chandler. Let's talk about Charles Oliveira. Winner of 1 of his last 3 with a knockout against Beneil Dariush, June of 2023 at UFC 289. Losing 2 of his last 3. 1 was a submission to Islam Makhachev in a rematch, a fight that a lot of people want to see a rematch from. Before that, my God, in the path to the lightweight title, beat Kevin Lee, Tony Ferguson, then Michael Chandler, defended it against Dustin Poirier, then ends up getting lost, beats Justin Gaethje with a first-round rear naked choke. So then, loses to Islam Makhachev. Then knocks out Beneil Dariush just a little over a year ago. This year takes a split decision loss to Arman Tsarukyan. And Arman Tsarukyan will be challenging Islam Makhachev for the lightweight title, I believe, in January. Ultimately, Charles Oliveira, born in 1989, DuBronx is not that much younger than Michael Chandler. Even so, I think, these odds are fair. Minus 255, I think is fair. I think, if you're going Oliveira here, probably Oliveira by submission as opposed to knockout this time. That's plus 135. It was a crazy circumstance that led to that knockout for sure. But, just remember how the first fight went. And plus 215 is not crazy for Michael Chandler. I think Michael Chandler can win this fight 40 times out of 100. I think he can. Plus 215, not insane. And Chandler by knockout, plus 375, he actually makes good on what he could have done in the first fight. Plus 375, not bad at all. I think that Oliveira is the most logical victor here. I do think if there is one of these 2 guys that could actually end up becoming the UFC lightweight champion again in Oliveira's case, then it is Charles Oliveira. I do think that this fight lasts over 1.5 rounds. That's minus 105. I think there will be a frenetic pace, but both these guys are, 3 years older now than they were the first time. They both suffered damage and losses since then. And so, I can't sleep on Michael Chandler. He's been too good for too long, and part of this has to be motivated from the fact that so many people hate Michael Chandler. It's not even for good reasons a lot of the time. So I can have some fun betting on Chandler as an underdog. I could see taking him as a cheap DFS option too. But Oliveira is the most logical victor here. Got to say that, and Oliveira by submission plus 135. I think if I'm picking a method of victory, that's the way to go. Oh, God, I'm so excited for that rematch. Oh, my God. The things that can happen. And I think that it is going to be a very worthy co-main event for UFC 309 in Madison Square Garden. And now we've got the main event. The legacy fight. Yeah. Between Stipe Miocic, arguably the greatest heavyweight of all time in all of mixed martial arts. As a Fedor fan passes by my window in the middle of the night and throws a brick through it. He is the plus 475 underdog. John Jones, quite possibly, especially if you ask Dana White, the greatest MMA fighter of all time. Hey, I have never said that John Jones is not one of the 3 greatest fighters to have ever lived to compete in mixed martial arts. I think that has become very apparent to all of us. Whatever has happened from him over these last couple, I mean, like his whole career has been like frustrating and fuel if you already don't like him. He's just not a good dude. I don't like his personality. Y'all know that. A lot of people don't. As I said before, I don't care about what his legacy is. As the fans and the fighter, we don't owe each other anything. You know, this is an exchange of entertainment for the money that you make to be a fighter. A lot of people aren't happy with that money, but that's, you know, I don't think you can put that on the fans, even with all the stolen pay-per-views, because there is a lot. Anyway, let's talk about Stipe first. It goes without saying, but Stipe.
Nick, one comment, man. One comment.
Oh, don't be scared, homie.
So you look what this dude did since capturing the heavyweight title. And by the way, his first 2 UFC losses were to JDS, okay? And he got knocked out by Stefan Struve. What an outlier of a result for a guy that ends up going on to have an incredible heavyweight title run. So, knocks out Fabricio Verdum to get the title at UFC 198. That was now over 8 years ago. Knocks out Alistair Overeem. Knocks out Junior Dos Santos. Beats Francis Ngannou thoroughly with 6 takedowns, 70 strikes to 21. January of 2018 to defend the title. Loses his first fight with Daniel Cormier, the first of the 3. Regains the title with a knockout August of 2019. A year later, wins the trilogy with a unanimous decision victory. And then his last fight, UFC 260, March of 2021, what is now over 3 years ago. It's 3 years and 8 months, so close to 4 years ago, was that knockout loss to Francis Ngannou, where he got folded. Stipe Miocic was born in 1982. 1982. 42 years old. And his opponent, John Jones. We all remember the devastating loss that he took to Matt Hamill. That wouldn't have happened if under the current rules. We all know about the amazing run that he went on, beating Ryan Bader, Shogun, Rampage, Lyoto, Rashad, Belfort, Chael. If only Chael had made it to the next round, John Jones might have lost the title because of that toe that was broken at a 90-degree angle. Gustafsson, in a fight that a lot of people think he lost. Glover, DC, OSP, the no contest with Daniel Cormier. And what hilariously is their last fight. God, I wish we would have gotten Daniel Cormier and John Jones at heavyweight. Knocks out Gustafsson. Anthony Smith takes him the distance. A split decision win over Thiago Santos that I am actually in the camp. Like, I thought John Jones thoroughly beat Thiago Santos. That's one that people like to look back on and say, like, you lost to Thiago Santos. Or, like, that was a split. That, I don't know why that was a split. You know, like, I think, like, the optics of that fight clearly, like, that's John Jones all the way. But it was close enough. It was what led people to start thinking that dude, you know, was on his way out. Because John Jones, born in 1987, he's not super young anymore. It's different than being born in 1982. The fight with Dominic Reyes that I have watched, no matter, I could watch it 1,000 times, and it's Reyes 3-2 every time. It's 48-47 Reyes. That's what that should have been. John Jones gets the nod. He gets the win. It's a win on his record. But Dominic Reyes, and especially even after the decline that Reyes saw after that fight, that's kind of the John Jones hangover effect. And we see it in other sports. You know, when you have to prepare for a big opponent in football, or in boxing or MMA, the preparation, I think, is so stressful and taxing for some people that it's not evidence that Dominic Reyes lost that fight, that he ends up going on to lose a bunch more, that we thought that he should have won, when we thought that, he was going to end up taking the vacant light heavyweight title. Dominic Reyes was the better fighter against John Jones, February of 2020. 3 years later, he comes back, and if you'll recall, before UFC 285, I was like, damn, I can't think of Cyril Gane as that heavy of an underdog when John Jones is coming up to heavyweight, getting the immediate title shot. Cyril Gane, all those other factors that I was like, I could see Gane as an underdog. The moment John Jones walked out for that fight, I was like, oh shit. Cyril Gane is like, John Jones looks massive. He looks like every bit a heavyweight. And he tore a hole through Cyril Gane with that first round submission. I would love to look, people keep saying, like, the interest level in this fight is like, well, Stipe, like, he's not going to be a walk in the park. This is no disrespect to Stipe. But I cannot find, it'd be awesome if Stipe Miocic knocked out John Jones or got any sort of victory. It would be amazing to do that in New York in front of John Jones's, like, home crowd. It'd be incredible. But these odds are accurate. I will not make the mistake of thinking that John Jones does not deserve to be this heavy of a favorite. I don't know how to bet this one. John Jones is worth every penny in DFS this week. I think, like, this fight could be over super quick. Under 2.5 is minus 145. I think, like, dude, we're talking about a 42-year-old that hasn't fought in close to 4 years. For how John Jones looked at UFC 285, there's no question to me. Minus 650, it could be minus 1,000, I think it'd be fair. Jones inside the distance is minus 300. Jones, see, I don't know. I don't know what to bet in this one. I think it's throwing money away to sprinkle some with the heart on Stipe at plus 475. I think that what we are going to see is exactly what we expect, is that John Jones, for all the rooting against him that people can do, for all the shit that he's taken this week, deservedly so, what he's probably going to go out there and do is go out and devastate Stipe Miocic. And, people are going to say, yeah, no shit, it was a 42-year-old fighter. When are you going to fight Tom Aspinall? But as far as the task at hand, John Jones should win this fight 85 times out of 100, 90 times out of 100. Again, I would love it if Stipe beat John Jones. But I'm well past the point now, especially after my hesitance against Cyril Gane. After I've seen him at heavyweight, I am well past doubting John Jones loses to, or thinking that John Jones can lose to anybody. Unless that guy's name is Aspinall. Not even Poatan. It's no one else. It's no one else. It's Aspinall, or he will not lose another fight for the rest of his MMA career, and he's made it very clear that he's very close to retiring. So yeah, like John Jones, as much, I'll say this too before we go, as much as I don't like John Jones, he's been around for so long and in so many big fights that there are a few fighters that still give me that like crazy feeling in my stomach as they walk out. That like, that's something that, like, definitely I think the UFC has kind of lost as the volume of cards, gets up, the roster expands. You see more guys in the UFC that you don't think should be in the UFC. But I get that feeling when I see John Jones and Stipe Miocic walking out to the octagon. So even though this is not the fight that a lot of people want to see, it's not the fight that I want to see for John Jones, there is going to be that feeling as they both walk out to the octagon in Madison Square Garden. Folks, that is it for UFC 309. This has been episode 158 of RotoBallers' official MMA podcast. Tap that. Again, there's a ton of combat sports this week for my picks on all of that stuff and more. Follow me on Twitter at RotoBrady. Follow the podcast at Tap That MMA Podcast on YouTube and Spotify. Check out my MMA DFS Value Picks article coming out on Friday afternoons. Look out for my MSN UFC 309 Fighters to Watch slideshow. Hopefully there's going to be more of those, probably on a one-off kind of basis. And come on to the Rotoballer MMA Discord on Saturday. The best of luck to my good friend Ilyas Mamadaliev, as he will be fighting at Ohio Combat League 33, which will be taking place in Newport, Kentucky. And I will be there live to support him, hoping for a very impressive victory for my friend Ilyas. Folks, thank you so much for listening to what has been a long episode of Tap That. Have yourselves a great week. Enjoy all of the combat sports events that there's got going on. It's going to be a circus this weekend. Peace.